Well, it is a choice. It's a choice to be a victim, and it's a choice to not be a victim. And when I didn't actually know the extent of my, like, all the things that happened to me until 6 or 7 years ago, when things started coming back to me in like flashbacks and night terrors, which are different than nightmares. And night terrors are excruciatingly scary. And I can't be like the best mom or the best spouse if I don't do the things for me first that help me be a better person. And that doesn't mean that I'm always the best spouse or the best mom or the best whatever. I mean, I'm human. I have my days. Sometimes I go to sleep at night and I'm crying because of my past trauma or whatever. And when all these memories came back, what I had pictured literally in my head were warehouses and warehouses full of boxes. And as I was working with my psychologist, we would take these on boxes and unpack them until I emptied all my warehouses.
Thank you for joining us. I enjoy your energy. I've seen you online and just read some of the stuff, so I appreciate the energy. But I'm curious, has the energy and the optimism always been there for you, or is this kind of because you see life a different way now?
I think it's actually a little bit of both. It definitely is part of my personality because I'm a very high energy person. Yeah. And people, you typically tell me like, wow, you have a lot of energy, or they typically say like, I like being around you because you have like really great energy. So part of it is definitely my personality, but the other part is definitely a mindset I have developed over many years, and like by knowing what I can control and what I can't control, and understanding like to completely let go of things I can't control, because if you don't, that really just sucks your energy down and just, drags you into the ground. So I'm very careful on what I put my energy into.
It's so true. And to be guarded. I'll tell you what, here's an interesting one that I never thought I would bring up because it's relevant, and I love real world stuff, especially like as it happens. I have a friend, and yesterday he said to me, he's like mid-40s, and he says, I'm just so disappointed in my family. And I said, well, like, qualify that, like your immediate family, like your wife, your kids. He said, no, like, we went and visited family and they're not happy for me. And one thing that's so interesting, Lynn, like, I don't ever expect anybody to be happy for me. Like, from the perspective, and I know that sounds crazy in certain circles, but I know in general, most people are narcissistic. They're really worried about themselves more than they're worried about you. And so I feel that sometimes that is a responsibility that we place on people, like an expectation of like, okay, well, look at Lynn. She's happy. She's vibrant. She's whatever. So I should copy that if I want, fill in the blank. But a lot of people, and sometimes the people closest to you, are the ones that aren't happy for your scenario.
Right.
That is so, I would love for you to unpack that. Like, that's hard for people, especially people like us, justice impacted, trauma impacted, when we're like, look how far we've come. Like, how dare you not applaud me? But I don't know that anybody owes us an applause.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like one of the things I've definitely learned is that if you're going to if you choose to not be a victim, right, and come out of that victim state, you need to do it for yourself. You can't do it for your spouse. You can't do it for your kids. You can't, because it's not for them. It's for you. And they get the benefit of you being a better person when you're around them. But it's ultimately for you. And if you're not doing it for yourself, then you're doing it for all the wrong reasons.
When did that like spark in your life? When did that become an okay thing for you to say? Because a lot of women, and you can correct me, a lot of women could feel selfish saying, I need to do this for me, right? Like women typically, like you said, your daughter. So like, you're obviously a mom. And so you have these, I would call them moral obligations.
Right.
And so how do you say to yourself in the mirror, I need to fill up my own cup first. I need to put my own airbag on. Like, how do you say that without feeling a bunch of guilt as a female?
Well, so it's funny you say that, because I was raised Catholic, and Catholics are stereotypically known for guilt, right? But I actually, amazingly enough, got out of Catholicism without having that guilt. So how I look at it is like, if I don't take care of myself, no one else is going to do it for me. It's not my kids' responsibility to take care of myself. It's not, I mean, obviously our spouse is supposed to support us in what we do, but it's not their responsibility to take care of your spouse, right? Like, I need to do things for me, and my husband and my spouse, he supports me in doing those things. But like, if I don't, and yes, it is selfish, but you have to be selfish in certain matters where it's like, it is really important to your personal like happiness and well-being. Because if you don't put yourself first, it's not going to get done. And then you're just going to keep draining yourself doing things for other people. And you can't do the best for other people. And I can't be like the best mom or the best spouse if I don't do the things for me first that help me be a better person. And that doesn't mean that I'm always the best spouse or the best mom or the best whatever. I mean, I'm human. I have my days. Sometimes I go to sleep at night and I'm crying because of my past trauma or whatever. But in general, I try to keep a very positive demeanor and I keep just trying to move forward. And with all the PTSD and trauma from the past, there's always something to work on. So that does get exhausting and that does get tiring. And sometimes, and there's many times where I just been like, I just want to give up. And when I talk to other trauma victims, I tell them, I say, it's not easy. It's not fun, but I'd rather be here than there.
That's powerful. It's almost like you're forcing yourself into a different choice.
Yes. Well, it is a choice. It's a choice to be a victim and it's a choice to not be a victim. And when I didn't actually know the extent of my, like all the things that happened to me until 6 or 7 years ago, when things started coming back to me in like flashbacks and night terrors, which are different than nightmares. And night terrors are excruciatingly scary. And when all those memories started coming back, because your mind is very good at repressing really bad trauma, I started like having like really bad spells where like I would just be like laying and shaking for an hour, half an hour. I couldn't do anything. I knew everything was going on around me. So it was kind of like a seizure, but it wasn't a real seizure. It was more of like just an emotional overload of my nervous system. And my psychologist I was working with at the time said that's completely normal for the trauma you've been through. You just have to wait them out. And the more work I did, the lesser and lesser they got. And I don't typically have those anymore. But yeah, like when I found out like all of the trauma that had happened to me, I had to make a decision. Like, do I want to keep doing this or do I want to do something different? And I decided I wanted to do something different.
How long ago did you decide that?
Probably about 2 or 3 months after I had figured out the extent of the things that had happened to me. So that was probably about 7-8 years ago.
So I would say fairly recent, right?
Yeah. So I had gone through most of my adult life not knowing the full extent of the trauma that had happened to me as a child.
How's that possible?
Your brain is really good at suppressing really, really bad trauma that you can't deal with as a small child because your brain just doesn't have the capacity. Now, not everybody apparently can do that. My psychologist said that's a very advanced thing for your brain to do. So it was really good at protecting me from completely falling apart. However, the side effect of that is that one of my PTSD side effects is having amnesia. So sometimes I have a really hard time remembering things. Sometimes if my PTSD hits me really bad, one time I forgot who my husband was for a few days. And that's really that doesn't happen very often, but it does. PTSD it can trip me up at any time. Now, that being said, I know certain triggers, so I do avoid anything I know is a trigger. But then with PTSD, sometimes things just pop up and you don't realize it's a trigger until it's already happening to you. So
yeah, that's fascinating. I was just talking to a gentleman who did 18 years in prison and has just written a really interesting book called Hey White Boy. And at the age of 5, he was molested by his mom's boyfriend. And interesting, this is only the second time I've heard this, once from him and then now from you. But as he wrote his book and then as he went on speaking tour with it, it started out as the boyfriend at 5. And then years later, through the writing and the speaking, he's up to 7 men, that molested him as a kid, as a baby, as a child.
Yeah.
And so people would go how do you forget that? That's what the normal response is, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you forget that?
It's because because I was the same age and it was my mother, and your mind just cannot process that information at 5. I mean, your mind is not developmentally there. I mean, it's hard enough to process that type of trauma as an adult, right? But I was a kindergartner. I was going to kindergarten school every day and playing blocks with my friends and dealing with that when I came home. So yeah, so your body, and that's why, if you know somebody who has been really badly abused and they're with their family and they don't react, they're sitting having dinner like nothing's ever happening, it's because your mind is very good at separating things and compartmentalizing them. And when all these memories came back, what I had pictured literally in my head were warehouses and warehouses full of boxes. And as I was working with my psychologist, we would take these on boxes and unpack them until I emptied all my warehouses.
Wowzers. That's almost like a super powerful way to put it, because you can, I don't want to use the term compartmentalized to like diminish
Oh yeah,
it.
no, it is compartmentalizing for sure.
Okay.
Because for years I was painting pictures of 5 boxes and I couldn't figure out why. I just knew I wanted to paint 5 boxes. And then when all these memories came back to me, I realized I had 5 big warehouses that I was unpacking in my head, like visually. That's how my head pictured it.
Wow, that's powerful. That's some powerful work. What was your childhood like?
So I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and my parents were blue collar. My dad worked in the printing industry, and funny enough, because I'm do publishing and ghostwriting, and my mom was a secretary for the town that we lived in. And so growing up, I lived on a dead end street in the suburbs right outside of Philadelphia. I had my best friend lived down the street from me. Her name was Margaret. So we would like hang out, play Barbies, do all the girl things, play Atari when Atari came out in the 80s. That was super fun. But the other part of my thing was like, so my home life was really bad when I was really little. And, but my school life was good. Like I went to a Catholic school. I really liked it. I had a really great friend at school named Jacqueline. We hung out, we did cheer together, all the fun stuff. But then in 4th grade, I started getting bullied. So then I had I was at home being like emotionally, physically abused by my parent, and then going to school and being emotionally abused by my friends. So the only escape I had was to go down the street to my best friend's house, Margaret, and I would literally just hang out at her house as much as possible. And so I recently had told her mom passed away last year. And I told her, I said, you were literally the only safe place I had growing up, because I would go to school and get bullied and I'd come home and be abused. And so I said, going to your mom was literally the mom I based my parenting off of, because her mom was the mom who took care of all 4 of the kids. Like she had 3 siblings. So she took care of all 4 of them. She's a stay-at-home mom. She's a great cook. She always listened to everybody. Like I never heard her raise her voice once. Like she was such an amazing woman and mother. And so I told her, I said, I based all of my parenting skills off your mom, because clearly I wasn't going to base them off of mine.
Oh, that's so powerful. So my wife and I, we have 4 kids, and 3 of them are girls. And so they're like ages 10 down. And our home is like, it's the pantry house and the fun house and, the ice cream in the freezer house. And, I grew up in this, not like you from that perspective, but I grew up in such a traumatic, just horrible, upbringing, and violence and, organized crime and just ugly. And so my wife grew up in Smallville, USA, and her parents are still married to this day, 50 years later, and 6 kids and church on Sunday. Like we couldn't be more like diabolical.
Polar opposites.
Totally, right? And so it's interesting that you make that comment about the friend down the street, because I've said that to my wife, like, if we have the resources to keep the pantry full and we have the resources to keep the ice cream freezer full, you just don't know what these kids are going through. Like,
yeah,
and I can't speak to this. You can. When a 9-year-old girl is knocking on your door at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. and doesn't want to go home, it's not for me to judge, but it's for me to understand that maybe our house is the safe place.
Yeah. And obviously to reach out to somebody to help her, right? Like child and family services or something, because typically there is something going on in the home, especially if they're constantly over your house.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it is. It's been a blessing to be, that house, that resource for people, especially coming from where I came from. It's an interesting connection. So childhood is all over the map for you. Does the trauma and the abuse continue through, adolescent and high school years? Does it trail off? How does that life kind of shape itself?
So with my mom, like she was always like emotionally abusive and tried to be physically abusive. Like one of the things she would always tell me was that, oh, well, you got the flu because you did something wrong and God is punishing you, or you cut your leg because you did something wrong and God is punishing you. And so she used to just walk up to strangers and tell them that, like, oh, I lost my first baby, blah, blah, blah. It was like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It was just so bizarre. And so one day as a teenager, she was telling me one of those, like, oh, I did something wrong. And I said, so what did you do so bad that God punished you by losing your first baby? And she looked at me and never said that again.
Wow. Whoa, used her own craziness on her, huh?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to put it out there, you need to live by it, right?
That's a very, very true statement. Man, that's interesting. Did you eventually break away from that and cut ties? Where's that relationship now?
So I ended up like my first spouse that I married, my husband. I just wanted to get out of my house, so I started dating like really young and married my first husband at 21. We obviously moved in together, and so and my and so I didn't know the extent, like I didn't know about the sexual abuse part until like 7, 8 years ago. So, but I knew about all the other stuff. So I always had like a very careful relationship with my mom, like, and there were certain things I would never tell her, things like that, because I knew I couldn't trust her. And so there was it was a very limited relationship. And then in the year 2002, she came out with breast cancer. So then I ended up I decided to take care of her, let my dad take care of her. And then my dad came down with cancer the year after. So they flip-flopped having cancer, going into remission. And then they both passed away within a year of each other. So during that time, that 6-year period, I was taking care of my 2 young kids who were 7 and 10 and going to school full time to be getting my teaching degree. And then also taking care of my parents with cancer. So I totally burned out doing that. I would not recommend that to anybody. So it was a very tenuous relationship. And I remember taking care of her one time, and this was very towards the end. And my parents had my husband at the time and myself had built a in-laws quarters above our garage. So we had a main house, and then they had in-laws quarters, and so they lived there. And that was really great because taking care of anybody, your parents, especially your parents, is really hard, but it's especially hard if they're far away. So the nice part was I could just walk across the driveway and take care of them. We had a 2-way intercom, so I could always just check on my dad, be like, "Hey Dad, how are you feeling today?" My girls would go over and play with them and stuff. And I remember one day I was taking care of my mom, and I had just made my mom and dad dinner at their apartment. And I said, "Do you guys need anything else?" And they're like, "No." So I turned around and I walked, and I remember, Travis, I literally remember it was like slow motion. Like I was putting my hand on the doorknob to turn the door, and my mom said, "I love you." And that was literally the first and last time I ever heard her say, "I love you." And that was a week before she passed away.
Whoa. Do you think that she was incapable of saying it, feeling it, doing it? Or do you think that was like a regret?
I think, honestly, looking back as an adult, because when you're a kid, you're just mad, right? Like you have no clue. But looking back as an adult and thinking about her patterns, like when I was growing up, I believe she clearly was mentally ill, because you don't do that to your child if you don't have some type of mental illness. I don't know what it was. Obviously, I can't diagnose her, but I think she was mentally ill. And I think the other part of it too was my grandmother, her mother, was very domineering. And my grandmother on the other side always used to say, "Your grandmother Mildred wears the pants in that family," and not in a good way. Like, not like she takes over and helps people solve problems. She was just wanting to control everybody. So I think that combination was not good. And the time she was abusing me, her mother was dying of breast cancer. So, and that's obviously not an excuse, but I know that obviously played into it, but not an excuse. I would never do that to any of my children, no matter what I was going through. But yeah, I think it was a combination of things. Obviously, I don't know for sure, and I can't talk to her about it, but that was the other hard component of it. Like, I learned about all this after she passed away. So I've had to learn how to deal with this on my own terms and not let it weigh me down. Yeah.
So fascinating. And we just experienced, so my wife's grandfather just passed last month. And so, great life, 93 years old, like great life.
Wow.
Math, just awesome. So we're very happy he's where he's at. But you can't help but see the grief that manifests itself in the form of regret.
Yes.
At the end of life.
And that's one thing I have told my girls over and over again. I said, no matter what you do, don't ever give up anything that later on you're going to say, "I regret, I wish I had done that," or "I wish I hadn't done that."
It is so true. It was interesting. I was sitting there with one of the siblings and as I was, I've had a lot of these conversations, much similar to you. And so I say to her, it's kind of interesting that after 93 years, it just ends like this.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is, I know one of the things with when people have dementia is that they don't one of the interesting things when people have dementia is like their brain either goes into like really happy mode, and they like love everything and their passions become like really happy for them, or they flip and they're just like, oh, I wish I would have done this, and they're in that regret mode all the time. And it's really sad to see that, because at that point, obviously you can't do anything about it because you don't have the mind capacity to brain capacity to do it. But yeah, it's regret is not something you ever want to have or live with.
Totally. So true. So your mom passes. I mean, so do you feel that her passing allowed you to kind of dive into this trauma, or did it force you in that direction? I mean, obviously you got married and you have children. So, you know, by that nature, you would think, okay, you were, you know, high functioning and okay on the outside, right?
Right. Yeah. So I didn't know again about that sexual abuse part, but I think what happened was like one of the things my psychologist told me, he said, your mind won't process the hard stuff unless you feel safe in your environment. And with my first spouse, I didn't know this, but he was also sexually abused by one of his family members. And I didn't know that until like 10 years into our marriage. And so we had a lot of things that like were not working well together, being two victims of abuse. So I never felt safe in that relationship, you know, expressing different things. And so when we got divorced and then I married my current husband, I felt safe around him. And then everything started coming back because my brain's like, oh, we're safe now. We're just going to dump all your memories back out into your brain. So my psychologist said that's very common for to happen to people of trauma or abuse, is that they'll go a long time and not know anything that happens, and then they'll finally get to a place where they feel safe in their life, and and then all this stuff starts coming out to process.
That's wild. How do you this could be a whole segment in itself based on this next question, but like I'm honestly asking for my selfish reasons, but like how do you take what you've gone through and adapt it to your parenting?
So one of the things is a really easy thing to be like, I definitely know I don't want to do this, this, and this. And then the flip side of that is I knew how that badly affected me. So I know, okay, if these things badly affect me, if I do the opposite, that's going to be a positive effect on my children. And obviously I wasn't a perfect parent. I don't think anybody is, but there were certain things, like certain rules we had, like we do timeout. We don't hit our kids. We don't ever hit our kids with like a belt or a piece of wood or a spoon or anything in the kitchen like my mom used to do. And there's certain things I just know, like that's just not right, because that's a power play on your kids, and you can discipline your children and have well-behaved children without hitting them. And so that was a big thing for me. And then I was very much a mama bear. Like I was very careful of like where they were going to be. And I wasn't a helicopter parent, but I said, okay, if you're going to be there, especially if they were sleeping over, like I always wanted to make sure like I knew who the parent was before I would let them sleep over. So I was just very careful bringing up my kids to make sure they were never in a situation, as far as I could control, right, that they would be put in that kind of danger. So
true, right? And I obviously I don't keep anything of our past, especially with our present, you know, but you know, having a 10-year-old daughter, she's our oldest girl. You know, she's completely aware. You know, I go into prisons every month and I have these conversations, and she sees pictures in the videos, you know, the people that I interview, and you know, there's some characters, scary ones, but it's so important for me. And I'll tell you a story that it's so for me like freeing as a dad, but yet so much childhood to me. So when we were just on vacation last week, and so I was going up and down in the hotel, and she said, "Can I come with you?" And as we were walking down the hallway, there was this kind of ominous dude in the long down the road approaching us, and we were both headed towards the elevator. So he gets in the elevator, and so I grabbed her and I said, "Hey, Kennedy, I forgot something in the room." And so I walked with her and I said, "Hey, I didn't forget anything. I just need you to be aware if I'm not here." And you know, you getting into this elevator at the age of 10 with another guy who's much older, and you know, I just don't need you to do it. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm not saying I just don't need you to do it. And what it did, Lynn, was for the next 20 minutes, I walked her through what a typical hotel is set up. And so I said, this is where the stairwells are in the hotel. They're typically all the way at the end of every hallway. They're always well lit. They always have emergency light. They always have the door open. And so I just want you to know that you're never stuck in this situation. It was like this healing moment for me as a 10-year-old boy to be like, I was always on guard. I was always like, who's coming
Yes.
in the house? Who am I going to have to like, that feeling, right? Like, even
Hmm.
talk about it, I can get tight. And so for me to kind of, I want to say maybe give her that power. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was like so freeing for me. And I didn't really ever connect that until after I was done with that experience.
Right. Yeah. Well, education is power. And that's what I always wanted to educate my girls on. Like, this is what's safe and this is what's not safe. So, really great example. My oldest daughter, she's 29, she'll be 30 in January. But when she went to college, I know college kids drink. I know they have parties, whatever. And my daughter was not like a big drinker or anything, but I wanted her to know, if you ever go to a party and you're drinking and you can't drive home, I don't care if it's 3:30 in the morning, you call me, I will come get you, no questions asked. Because I rather get a call from you than a police officer saying that you're dead or other things, right?
Yes.
So I was always very upfront with them, not to scare them. So I don't like parents who try to scare their kids, because living in fear doesn't make you make good decisions. It makes you make bad decisions. But you do need to educate your children and say, look, this is how it is. This is why I'm telling you this, because I want you to be safe. I just want you to be aware. I don't want you to be like walking around being afraid of everything, right? So how you word it and phrase it and how you talk to your children about it is a really big, is a real, it can definitely form either positive or negative habits for your kids moving forward.
So true. And I think it's like, it's kind of like you said, where people ask me all the time, like, why have you never done drugs? And my answer is like, my dad was a heroin addict.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple for people like you and I to point to like, oh, don't do that.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder for me, and I don't know if that's because I'm a male or I don't know, but it's harder for me sometimes to articulate, the stories of like, let me tell you why I'm explaining all these things to you, Kennedy. She's 10. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just trying to use the freaking elevator, Dad.
Right. I think one of the things for me anyway, it gets hard to articulate because like when I'm thinking about it, right? Like when we think about all our experiences, it always brings up emotion. Now, whether we're attached to that emotion or we figured out a way to detach from that emotion's still going to be there. And how I explained it to one of my friends is that because they said, well, how do you deal with that emotion? Like if it comes up? And I said, well, one of the things I've learned to do is that I've learned to be like, okay, like acknowledge the emotion, right? Because it's not bad to have emotions. Emotions protect us from things like before we had modern cities, we had to hunt and gather. Like if that freaking whatever was chasing you, you needed to be scared and run. But we don't have to be scared and run all the time. But that's what trauma does to you. It makes you scared and want to run at the littlest things. So what I told them I do is that I said, what I do is I acknowledge the emotion. I say, I know why you're here. And I talk to it like it's a friend sitting next to me on a park bench. And I'm like, but I want you to sit on the park bench over there. I don't want you to sit on the park bench with me. So I'm just going to have you sit there and I'm going to sit here. And we're just going to sit here until we're both okay and calm. And I have to give myself those few minutes. And usually, most of the time, not all the time, most of the time that will work.
Wow. That's good. That's good. That's a good 10-to-1 exercise.
Yeah. There's a lot of tools I have learned to develop and everybody's different. So I'm not saying that tool is good for everybody, but that's one I learned really works for me. And so what I tell people who've been through trauma is like, I'm like, just try things out and see what works for you. But one of the things that has been a huge game changer for me, especially with my trauma and the emotions it brings up, is learning that I can have the emotion, but it doesn't have to control me. Because at the time when the emotion controls you, that's when you get into like the spirals and the whatever, right? The depression, the anxiety. That doesn't mean that every time I try to do that, it works. Like, because sometimes my anxiety goes out of control and I have to take stuff for it. But most of the time it works. And the other part of that is that you have to be aware of the emotion first. Like when I first found out about all this stuff, everything was just cycling. And so I couldn't stop it and be aware of it to know, oh, I have to stop and calm down. But once you figure it out and once you figure out, oh, I know this triggers me or I know this makes me feel like this, then you can start to gain back control of your life. And it is a lot of work and you do need tools to do it, but you can do it.
I love that. And then I don't know about you, but I enjoy, now that I'm on the other side of these crazy coins, it's so fun to be able to be in a room full of people or, be at dinner with, my wife and a bunch of other couples and like to be able to really help them unpack, like the heaviness that we all feel that none of us really want to tell each other that we feel.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, and I mean, I can't speak for other people, but what I feel is that a lot of people, it's also like the guilt, right? A lot of people feel guilt because they have that. But I learned to move past that very early because I said, I was 5. Obviously, I did not want that to happen to myself, and I did not make that happen to myself. And obviously, when you're little and you're going through that, you're like, you want to escape and you can't. But the whole thing is just like understanding that you were a victim and now you're not, that you have to like work your way out of that. And it's okay to have those feelings, and it's okay to share them with people, but also obviously share them with people that you trust. Don't just share them with anybody, but to know that other people who have gone through all sorts of trauma have similar feelings. You're not the only person out there.
It's so true. Do you think, well, let me rewind and then I'll go to that one. How did you get into, what do you do for a living for those people that don't know?
So for people who don't know, I do ghostwriting and book editing. So I help people take their idea in their head and write it out. And I do like book coaching and everything with it. So I do it a lot differently than most ghostwriters. So I literally walk people through the writing process from idea all the way to published book.
That's what I can't help, and you can correct me, I can't help but think that so much of the work that you've done internally and the trauma that you've gone through contributes to the success of the book writing process.
I've often thought about that, Travis. And one of the things that I realized is that when I'm writing, my head is in a completely different space, and it's not in the trauma space at all. And so I think that is one of the reasons why A, I love to write, and B, I love to write like other people's stories too, because I can also help them shape their story as they tell it, right? Because it's still their story, and I want to always tell it in their voice. But it helps me to tell other people's stories because I've been through so much. And people say like, oh, I don't want to, like, I don't know if I should share this with you. I'm like, throw it out there. Trust me. I probably have heard worse. I have been like in a traumatic situation growing up, and I was a middle school teacher. So most likely I have heard some version of it. And that puts people really makes them comfortable because I don't judge people. Like I've been through so much. Like I mean, sometimes we all judge people, right? But like, I do my best not to judge people because like, I don't know what day they've had. I don't know who they've been with. I don't know if they've been abused that day. I don't know if they've just had a horrible day. And that's one of the reasons why when I see somebody, if I see like, oh, I like their blouse or their earrings, or like, I like the way their hair is, I try to compliment them because that might be the only nice compliment they got all day, all week, all year. It
is so true. And what I've learned with, my coaching is almost all of the CEOs that I deal with there's so many parallels that I can draw between CEOs and convicts. Most of them live in a facade. Most of them are lying to either themselves or their significant others.
Or both.
Are running from a boatload of trauma and abuse. When you get to be like a high functioning, billion-dollar CEO, you typically deal with a ton of trauma and abuse. And it oftentimes is what fuels you, but you just continue to push it down so far that, you're just running, and it's just like caffeine and cocaine. And then it becomes, like I'm skydiving, you're chasing this something. And so there's so many parallels that I get to draw from that. And so it's an interesting, I could have never put myself in this situation to be able to talk to people on both sides of the fence.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other part of that too, Travis, that you hit on is that when you're in those situations, right, you have to feel like you're in control. And so the more you're in control, the more you feel like you're in control, and you're like, oh, I'm past this, or I don't have to deal with this because I'm in control or whatever, when it's actually the opposite, right? You're just doing things, you're just supplementing it with like the cocaine or the alcohol or the whatever to get through it, but you're not really in control because you're not even in control of yourself. You're just doing things and actions to make up for the lack of control you do have by having control over others, so to speak.
It's so true. It's so true. It's such a facade, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. And so how do you say you do the book ghostwriting process differently than some people, without getting into the granular details and the secret sauce, what is it that makes you different in that process?
So what makes me different than most ghostwriters is most ghostwriters will be like, okay, you give me the content and I'll write your book, and then we meet so often. But what I do is, because I know the whole publishing process is really scary. And it's not scary. It's part of it is because like, people don't know what to do, but the technical stuff is easy. But what's hard is people getting past themselves. What's hard is people getting past the imposter syndrome, or people getting past like, am I good enough to write a book? Is anybody going to read this? So most of what I do, Travis, is actually like almost like counseling, right? Or like being a coach or a best friend to a lot of my clients, which I'm not actually their best friend, but it's more of like that, hey, you can do this, right? And like, I tell them like why their book is good or why they should do this, or, that they don't have to worry about this part because that's what I'm going to handle. Like one of my clients the other day, she's like, I'm really scared that this isn't going to sound good. I said, Rebecca, do not worry about it. I said, if it's not going to sound good, I will tell you. She's like, thank you. So just putting my clients at ease and helping them work past themselves is one of the things I do as a ghostwriter that I don't think a lot of other ghostwriters do.
I love that. Almost so many people that I know that want to write a book, right? People, especially people I get to interview who've been through so much and have such a story and, connections and all this fun stuff. But I would say all of them say the two things that you mentioned. Number one, who's going to want to, listen to this thing or read this thing? And then number two, they get into the, what gives me the authority to even publish this thing?
Yeah, self-doubt, your own self-doubt and your own self are yourself is the number one blockade to doing anything in your life. Like if you can't get past yourself, you'll never do it. And what I tell people is I say like, okay, what's the purpose of your book? Is it, do you want to hand it out as like a calling card, or do you just like one of my clients, he's like, he just published his book. His name is Tom Schott. It's called Dreams Take Flight. And he was the person who started, who is responsible basically for the disc golf to be so popular in the US, because he started doing all these world championships in California in the early 70s. And so everybody in the industry knows him. And he's like, I want to write my story. He goes, because if I don't write it, no one else will. And then I won't leave my legacy behind. So maybe you just want to write a book to leave your legacy behind. You don't have to sell 1 million copies. There's a lot of different reasons to write a book. But what I tell people is know the reason you're going to write your book before you write it. If it's to sell 1 million copies, that's fine. If it's just to hand out as a calling card, that's fine. But do it because you want to do it. Don't do it because you feel like you have to, or you feel like you should, but do it because you want to do it, because it represents you. You're leaving your legacy behind, and you're doing something that you want to accomplish that's on your bucket list.
Yeah, I love those things. It gives you such clarity. I just had a buddy call me before this, and he's like, I'm ready to level up. I'm ready for you to introduce me to somebody for coaching, and, I'm ready to do this. And I said, okay, well, what are the two things that you would want to get out of it before I introduce you to somebody?
Right. Because
if you can't tell me, hey, these are the two tangible things that I want as an outcome or a change, I can introduce you to everybody, but you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be ready to change too. Like a lot of times I see people like with people, especially like with your dad, right? He was a drug addict, and they're like, oh, I'll give them another chance. I'll give them another chance. I'm like, no, you can't. They're not. No one who's addicted to anything is going to change unless they have said, I am ready to change. And even then, it does not always successful, but you can't make somebody change. Even if you are watching them go through the lowest point in their life and they're getting drugged through the mud, it doesn't matter. Like they have to decide to do it for themselves. You can't make anybody do it, no matter how much you talk to them or no matter how much sense you're trying to talk into them.
No, you are spot on there. Where do you want this to take you? Would you have a goal in mind, to go back and ask you the same question? Or is this just a cathartic space and a space that you enjoy to be in?
Oh, as far as like the trauma piece?
Yeah.
I like to, every once in a while, I don't do a lot of these types of interviews, but I do them with our background and everything. I'm like, okay, this is somebody I totally need to connect with. But I like doing these because I want other people to know that are out there that have been through trauma, like that you can get past it. It's work. You have to decide do you want to do it, but you're not stuck. You're not stuck unless you decide you want to be stuck. So that's why I like to do these things, is because I know there's other people out there who have had similar experiences to you and I, and unless we talk about it and tell people, hey, I know this happened. It sucks. It's horrible. But you know what? You can still be you, and you can still be the best version of you. You just have to put more work into it than everybody else. It's like my intuitive healer, Scott Clover, says. He says, yeah, everybody has their ladder to climb out of their hole in. He goes, but yours is just 5 times longer than most other people's.
Wow, that's so funny. What a good analogy.
Yep.
That's a good analogy. I love
I
that.
know. I said, well, that kind of makes me feel better and not good because I have to do more work, but it also makes me feel better because I've done it.
Yeah, right. How long, like, are you still doing some work, or do you think, like, how long did you do work for to kind of get to this place of positivity and healthiness?
It took me probably 2 or 3 years with working with a really good trauma informed psychologist to get to a spot where I wasn't triggering a lot. And that's one thing I will recommend to people. Like if you do have trauma in your like legitimate trauma, like some people are like, oh, I was so traumatized because my boyfriend didn't meet me on time for my date. I'm like, no, that's not, and don't make fun of it because that's not cool, right? So, but if you legitimately have trauma, I always recommend don't go to just a regular counselor. Go to a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, unless you want to go to a psychiatrist, more prescribed drugs. And I was not into that. But go to a psychologist who is trauma informed because it makes a big difference in therapy and how far ahead you can get and how they understand you. So a trauma-informed psychologist understood me much better than the counselor I used to go to. I mean, the counselor was fine, but they're not going to get me to the place I need to go with what I had to deal with.
Yeah, no, I agree. Lived experience is such an interesting thing. I've kind of been on this kick for a while. Like it's knowing exactly what you're looking for is helpful, especially counselor / therapist. But having somebody like you said, like it's much different than just going to the doctor. Like you're looking for a surgeon for a specific need. And I think that I would call it lived experience. Like, have you handled this exact problem?
Right.
Yeah.
Or something at least close to it. Like they're familiar with it. And that was super helpful because my first psychologist was really great. And then I worked with Scott, who is an intuitive healer, and he's been fantastic. Like he took me to the next level that my psychologist couldn't take me to because Scott works on an energetic level. So he was helping me out a lot with like the stored trauma energy in my body. And so he helped me a lot with that and helped me get rid of a lot of other things. Then that continued on my journey. And now what I'm doing is I'm working with this book. It's called Mind Your Body. And the whole book is based on how your trauma ends up in your body physically and how it can actually make your health issues that you have worse or actually make you have health issues that don't show up on tests. But it's in your head, but it really isn't, right? So like it's in your head because it's the trauma that's creating these physical problems in your body. But you can actually, when you learn how to release the trauma with this journal speak that Nicole talks about in her book, Mind Your Body, that you can successfully get past that chronic pain and everything. So that's what I'm working on because I have chronic pain and some other issues that I know are worse because of my PTSD. So that's the part I'm working on right now. And I feel like I'll always be working on something and I will always have to be aware of like, what I'm doing and like how I'm reacting to things and think, okay, am I reacting to this appropriately or am I reacting to this from a place of like scarcity or fear or PTSD or whatever, right? So for people like us who have been through that experience, these traumatic experiences, I feel like we need to be just not like on guard because we don't want to be in that fear state or that flight state, but just aware of like what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're presenting ourselves to other people because of our experiences and how easily they can trip us up.
Yeah, it is so true. It is so true. Man, so inspiring. I love it. If you're, there's going to be so many women listening to this out there who have like what I call mutually exclusive thoughts. And so I'd love for you to give them some insight and I'll give you some context around it. I tell a lot of these women, you can be in prison and you can still be a good mother.
Yeah. So what I tell people is like, what can you do, right? There's certain things you can't do. Like you can't physically visit them every day. Can you write them a letter and put it in the mail? And one of the things I told one of my friends who was having some issues with her relationship with her daughter, I said, it doesn't matter if she responds to you. If you keep writing her emails and sending them to her, she knows you're thinking about her. I said, and it's going to take time and it's not going to be one email. I said, but you're going to have to keep, and the other thing is don't be judgmental of the other person because if you do that, they're never going to come back to you, right? Like you have to be open heart, even if it's just a letter that says, dear Michelle, I love you. I think about you every day. Love, Mom. Put it in the mail. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. It doesn't have to be anything that's like, prose, you have to think it out of poetry, whatever, right? All the person has to know is that you're thinking about them, you care about them, and that you love them.
That's so good. I don't know how we're going to top that one, but
let's try.
It's such a good one. No, it really is. And it's like, sometimes the obvious answer is the best one, right? Like that's so good. But talk to these, ladies, especially because the guys get enough attention as it is, but talk to these ladies that are there, that are behind walls, that are dealing with trauma and I'm not enough and I've got guilt and I've got shame, and take as much as you time and as you need and pour into them. And I'd love to end it on that note.
So I would say, because I've never been in prison myself, except for my own emotional prisons. But I would say to any other woman who is listening to this, who has been through trauma, is that start where you think you can start. Pick up something easy. Like if there's one behavior you have that you don't want to have anymore, start there. Don't worry if you mess up. We all mess up. We're all human. It's okay to be human. It's okay to mess up and say, I messed up today. Tomorrow I'm going to do better. So give yourself a lot of grace and know that you can always work on yourself. You have that choice and you have that power to work on yourself. You just have to decide to pick up the baton and start walking with it.
I love that. One of the things that I would always talk about in prison is I would always talk about how they hold the pen. And, right, you've got the power to rewrite this story.
You do. Yeah, you have the power. You have the choice. That's one of the things we have as humans, right? Is choice. Yeah. And we can choose not to rewrite our story. And that's a perfectly good choice. I'm not judging anybody who doesn't rewrite their story. But you can't complain about where you are if you're choosing not to rewrite your story.
Big time facts. I love that. All the people who are out there who want to write something, how do they get a hold of you?
So if you'd like to get a hold of me, we like to chat. I love to chat with people about writing their book, obviously. I do a complimentary discovery call where we chat to make sure that we're a good personality fit, because that's the one thing, is that whatever ghostwriter you pick, make sure you're an awesome personality fit, because you guys are going to be best friends writing your book. So if you want to get a hold of me, I would love to chat with you. You can go to my website, which is www.writeforyou.me. So it's WRITEFORYOU.me. And so once you get on my website, you can fill out my contact form. I've got a discovery call button. You can just book a time with me, and then we can just chat about your book to see if we're a good fit. And, I've got lots of different packages and options that I specialize for people because not everybody has the same timeline to write their book. So if you want to write it in 90 days or 2 years, I can help you out.
I love it. I love it. I hope you have the best birthday. I hope you enjoy your cake. And I think what you've gone through to be able to articulate it, I know that this conversation will be healing and helpful for someone else. So I'm grateful for the time in this space.
Well, thank you for letting me come on, Travis, because one of the things I do want to do is, like, if I had to go through this experience, I want to at least help somebody else go get through it and be successful.
That's the goal, right? Continue to lift everyone else up where they're at.
Yes.
I love it. Have the best birthday.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.